All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. This is the second session of our open source tools trial series that's focused on tools to support conferences and events. My name is Emily, and I am the CSCCE Project and Community Manager, and I'll be facilitating this call with our Communications Director and Content Archivist, Katie Pratt. The presentation portion of this call will be recorded, but the subsequent Q&A will not be. So to start, we'll just share a little bit about CSCCE, particularly for those of you who are new to our community calls. So we champion the importance of human infrastructure for effective collaboration in STEM by providing training and support for the people who make collaboration succeed. And these people are the scientific community managers. So how do we do this? We develop and publish resources, which include frameworks, guidebooks, and tip sheets that address topics that are central to scientific community engagement. We also provide professional development opportunities, including trainings, webinars, and consultancies. We convene a community of practice that now has over 600 community managers from around the world, where we can crowdsource solutions, get peer support, and access programming. And lastly, we conduct research to better understand community managers as well as the communities that they support. So this tools trial series that you're joining today is just one aspect of the programming that we offer to our community of practice. A little bit of background about our tools trial series. Our tools trials are intended to help STEM community managers to explore various online tools. So we began running tools trials in 2020 when the onset of the pandemic prompted a shift to virtual collaboration. And now, thanks to support from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, we'll be running 5 trials over the next couple of months that are focused on open source projects, tools, and platforms to facilitate collaboration and convening. And we'll also be producing a series of tip sheets to consolidate what we learn and to share recordings of demos on our YouTube channel and website. So we'll walk through all of the various ways that you can participate in today's call. We take notes in a collaborative Google Doc, which Katie has shared in the chat. And here you'll find our community participation guidelines, core values, and our virtual event safety policies. In the doc, we invite you to provide your name and affiliation, answer our opening prompts. You're welcome to take notes and jot down questions during the presentations. Today, we are fortunate to have 2 guest speakers, and so we plan to hold questions until these presentations are over. We ask that you please leave your questions in the notes doc rather than in the chat, just to help us stay organized and to moderate the Q&A, and so that speakers can respond to your questions in writing. Please note that we have sections related to questions for use cases and community management, as well as a separate section for technical questions. And if you have any resources to share, you're welcome to add them to the resources section of the doc. And we also encourage you to respond to technical questions that are raised. And lastly, toward the end of the call, we appreciate it if you could just take a couple of minutes to complete our very brief survey to share what you learned from today's session and any feedback that you have for us, either on today's session or the series as a whole. If you're new to our community, we invite you to join our Slack workspace, where you can connect with other community managers and learn about our upcoming programming. You may also consider joining our open source special interest group, which is co-led by Sarah Petty of the Open Knowledge Foundation and Bree Johns from the Gathering for Open Source Hardware. You're also welcome to sign up for our mailing list. You can send us an email, and we encourage you to pencil our next call in this series on your calendar. And this next call is going to focus on Open Review, which is an open source platform for reviewing conference abstracts. So in today's call, we'll start with a recap of our first tools trial, in which we were introduced to using GitHub for community collaboration, as well as Markdown for creating blogs. And I'll then turn it over to today's guest speakers, who both represent the Carpentries. And they'll give us a brief overview of their organization and community, and then show us how they use Markdown and HedgeDoc for collaborative writing, as well as GitHub to organize conferences. We'll wrap up with a Q&A and discussion. And again, we value your active participation throughout today's call in the form of adding useful links, resources, reflections, notes, and questions to our collaborative doc. I'll introduce our speakers for today's session. We're delighted to be joined today by Toby Hodges, who is Director of Curriculum at the Carpentries, as well as Manisha Sane, who is the Deputy Director of Technology at the Carpentries. So before we start today's presentations, I'm going to pause for just a few minutes to allow you to respond to the 2 opening reflection prompts that we've included in the notes doc if you haven't done so already. So we invite you to share your level of familiarity with GitHub and Markdown, as well as your motivation for attending today's session. And if you're comfortable doing so, you're welcome to leave your name and affiliation next to your comments, because we might refer back to it later in the Q&A. And we also invite you to +1 other comments that resonate with you. So with that, we'll just take a pause for a few minutes and then come back and continue on. I see the comments are starting to slow down a little bit. So if you've already added your thoughts, you're welcome to review what other folks are contributing and +1 anything that resonates with you. So I see that we have, similar to our first tools trial, a lot of variation and familiarity with GitHub as well as Markdown. There is also some interest, a lot of interest in learning about HedgeDoc, particularly as a alternative to HackMD or Google Docs. So yeah, thank you for sharing, and we will continue on. So to recap what we covered in our first tools trial, on last week's call, we were introduced to using GitHub for community collaboration. We heard from community managers from rOpenSci as well as the Touring Way, who demonstrated how they use GitHub to transparently and collaboratively co-develop events with their communities. So these are some of the highlights that came out of that first session. So we talked about how it's important for community managers to meet their community members where they are in terms of choosing tools and platforms. So in particular, we discussed the importance of understanding what tools community members are already using regularly, and see if there's variation in expertise that might impact onboarding pathways and scaffolding. And we talked about how community managers can upskill members by fostering transferable skills that can be applied when using platforms like GitHub and other contexts. We also talked about some of the features that are built into GitHub that can help users to standardize and streamline their workflows. So some of the features that we talked about included issue templates and tags that can be used to organize and categorize content. We talked about how we can use checklists to track internal and external workflows, and how bots can be really useful for automating repetitive tasks. And we saw how the Turing Way uses bots to make sure that contributors are acknowledged in a timely fashion. And lastly, we talked about the use of private versus public repositories for internal tracking of processes versus public collaboration and co-creation. So today we'll be expanding on these ideas as we explore how the Carpentries uses GitHub to organize their conference sessions. In the first tools trial, we also got a very brief introduction to Markdown. And for those of you who don't use Markdown, it allows users to add formatting elements like headings and italics to plain text documents. So we learned how it's used to write Data Umbrella's blog. And today we'll be growing our knowledge of Markdown as we learn how to write collaboratively in HedgeDoc. And for anyone who is new to using GitHub or Markdown, in the resources section of our doc, we have some links to help people get started. And if you know of any other links that are useful that are not included, we definitely encourage you to add them. So if you missed last week's call, or 2 weeks ago, or if you're looking for a refresher of what was covered, you can find the recordings, recap, and selection of resources on our blog. It's linked in the slide there. And we also have a corresponding tip sheet that is in progress that we'll be releasing in the coming weeks. So at this point, I am happy to hand it over to our first speaker, Toby. He'll be giving an overview of the Carpentries and introducing us to HedgeDoc.